Hello, my name is Samer Audi, and this lesson titled Web Applications Fundamentals is part of the Web Application Security video series. You can access the lesson and available resources and other lessons in the course online at sameraudi.com. If you haven't yet visited my website, go ahead and get yourself familiar with it. It's where you will find online content and download available and related resources. This is chapter 1, and all content and resources related to this chapter will be available here. Okay, so let's get started. You can think of this lesson as the basic prerequisite knowledge required for the course. In this lesson, I'll be covering the following topics. We'll start with some important concepts and terminology. I'll move on to discuss the components that are in a web application. We'll cover the HTTP model and how it works, and we'll try to differentiate between client-side and server-side technologies. And we will do some practical work, so there will be a demo and also lab activities for you to perform. All right, so let's get started. First things first, I think it's very important that we know the common concepts and be able to differentiate between these technical and non-technical terms. So we'll start with a website and a web page. I think we all know what a website is. It's that online location that we visit via our web browser, like Internet Explorer or Chrome or Safari. We provide a web address like facebook.com, for example, or google.com. That web address is called the URL, or the Uniform Resource Locator. But technically, what a website is a collection of one or more web pages plus other related resources. Resources like images, for example, videos, some scripts like JavaScript, and so on. So a website is this collection of web pages. Again, if we visit a website here, this is a web page, and these graphics are some of the artifacts available on this web page. And when I click from one link to another, most of the time I'm visiting other web pages on the website. I say most of the time because sometimes a website with current technology like HTML5 and CSS3, the website can potentially be a single web page. However, single or multiple web pages, we're still talking about a number of resources that are related to each other. The way that these resources are usually related, especially web pages, is through hyperlinks. Again, we're all familiar with a link. We click it and we go from one place to another. But this is actually the most powerful thing perhaps on the web, because when we click a page and go to another page, when we click a link, on a page and go to another link, we might be visiting another page on a different server in a different country. So that's the power of the hyperlink. Again, the ability to include resources on a single page. This graphic can be on one website, and this graphic can be on a totally different location. This is what makes the web so powerful. Okay, The second thing I want to discuss is what we mean by an intranet and an extranet. First of all the websites that we visit publicly are available usually for all people. You have an address or you click a link and you are there. But some websites are available only for a selected number of users. For example, an employee-only website. Although this website may be internal only, and what I mean by internal is part of the internal network and not accessible via the internet, but sometimes it is accessible via an internet address or URL. But you require some credentials, login credentials, to enter the more functional parts of the website. These internal only websites are known as intranet sites. Similar to intranet sites, some websites are available also for a selected number of external people like partners and suppliers and so on, and these are called extranet sites. And finally, this is perhaps what's most relevant to our course, is the difference between what we call a static website and a dynamic web application. Static and dynamic here refer to the content of the website, the data that you see on a website. Let's say right now I log into facebook.com. What I will see is my profile picture, my information, my posts, my friends, and so on. If you log into the same exact location and web page, you will see your data. So this is what we call dynamic data. Dynamic data is basically what we call an application. So usually that type of website, we call it an application simply because it provides some kind of useful functionality. Like Facebook, for example, or Twitter, and so on. There are a number of websites that the content is really hard-coded into the web page itself, and we call this static content. The content doesn't change from one user to another, and basically it's a simple website that has information like about us, contact us, our products and services, like an informational website. Static websites are not very interesting, especially in security terms. Attackers are not interested in these types of websites, while a dynamic web application has private and confidential data, maybe some financial records, and attackers usually target these type of websites. Okay, let's talk about the components of a web application and how they connect and work together. First of all, let's say I have a computer. On that computer, I have my web browser. Again, it can be Safari, it can be Chrome, Firefox, and so on. Using that web browser, I enter an address, google.com or microsoft.com, and I access that website. So what actually happened is that I send a request via the internet to another computer somewhere in the world. My computer in this scenario, and more specifically my web browser, is the client, and the layer at which my computer and my browser exist in this architecture is called the client tier. The computer that I try to access and request that resource from is basically the server. The server is sitting somewhere in the world, has a special software called the web server software or the HTTP server. And what that software does is listens and responds to requests that it receives. On that server, I also have usually all the related artifacts and web pages. So when I access google.com, basically I'm asking for the first page or the home page of that website. All right, let's expand this picture a little bit. So I mentioned that we access a server, and we said that usually the web server. But in a more complex environment, there are usually multiple servers. For example, I might have a dedicated advanced server called the application server, which is basically responsible for business logic and functionality. So in this scenario, the web server is responsible for presentation. You ask for a page, the web server responds with the resource that you ask for. Behind it is the application server that's taking care of your login or that financial transaction where you're transferring money from one account to another. These servers are basically available on a layer in this architecture called the middle tier. Therefore, as you guessed, there is another tier, and this is basically where my data resides. So again, I would have a dedicated server that has some kind of a database management system like Oracle or MySQL, and that server houses my dynamic data, and this is called the data tier. Okay, so we said that the client makes a request and the server is listening and responds back with the resource I request. The way that the client and the server communicate is via a protocol called HTTP, or the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTP is the de facto protocol of the web. It works based on a request-response paradigm, and we've all seen it in our web addresses or URLs. Sometimes we see HTTP, sometimes we see HTTPS. So HTTP versus HTTPS is basically non-secure transmission of data for HTTP and secure transmission of data for HTTPS. HTTP operates on the default port 80, that means port 80 on the server is open for web traffic. When the server supports HTTPS, is basically listening on default port 443. I say default port because sometimes these ports are changed as needed. Okay, also we're talking about some software here. So we mentioned the client, we mentioned the web browser on my computer. Also, we mentioned the server, and we said we have HTTP server. So basically, a client is anything that is accessible on my computer, the computer of the user. And the server basically is that remote machine sitting somewhere in the world that has the resources that I'm interested in. So again, the client is, let's say, start with the user, the personal computer of the user, and more specifically, the web browser. The job of the web browser is to render or translate web pages which are written in a programming language called HTML or the hypertext markup language into that visual website that we see in front of us. The server basically is, again, a certain computer somewhere in the world that has a dedicated software called HTTP server, or sometimes web server like Apache or IIS and so on. And the job of this software is to listen and present web pages to the client when they are requested. So again, that request response model that we have online. Let's dig deeper into HTTP requests and responses. So we said that my client initiates an HTTP request. The request itself is basically where I say, I want this resource or that resource. A request has a header that we usually don't see but can if we want to, and I will demo how to a little bit later. What's relevant to us in this course is basically the request method. HTTP support a number of request methods. The most common by far is the GET method. Basically, when we enter an address and in our address bar on the web in the web browser, and we hit enter, that's a GET method. Most of the time when we click links, we are invoking the GET request method. Every now and then we encounter what we call a web form, where we enter, for example, our username and password, where we register, and there is a submit button. More often than not, this is a post HTTP request. The job of the GET method is to get resources from the server. The job of the POST method is to send data that we usually type into our online forms. Okay, in a similar way, when the server responds to us, basically that's an HTTP response. And again, it has a header. The HTTP response has a header that we usually don't see. We see the actual resource, which is sent as part of the header. So we only see the outcome, which is the web page. However, again, what we are interested with in this course is the HTTP response code. As users, we don't see most of these codes. However, every now and then we encounter the 404 error. I'm sure that some of you have seen the 404 error. So when there's an error and the website doesn't really handle the error in a user-friendly way, then we see that ugly 404 not found error. But when everything is okay, we usually don't see any of these codes unless we look into the header. So these codes are 100 level codes. They are informational. The 200 level successful. So for example, if I ask for a web page, it's there and I'm authorized to see it, I will see a 200 OK in the HTTP response header. The 300 level codes are redirect related. The 400 are client errors. For example, if I try to access a web page or a folder that I'm not authorized to see, I will see a 403 forbidden. The 500 level codes are server errors. Okay, it's time for some practical work. So I will demo first using a software called Wireshark to see and observe HTTP traffic. So let's go ahead and start Wireshark. Wireshark basically is a network analyzer, and what I want to do is to tell Wireshark that I'm listening on this network interface. So I'm using Wi-Fi, and I will click this button here to start capturing traffic. Then I'm gonna go to my website and click few links. So courses, web application security, chapter 1, and that's enough. I'm gonna go back here and stop. Okay, so I notice here that Wireshark captured a large number of packets, as you can see here. I'm gonna pick any random HTTP. As you can see here, it says HTTP, and I want to look at the TCP/IP stack. So we said that web communication takes place over HTTP. HTTP is an application layer protocol, application layer in the OSI stack. So this is a bit into the networking side, so I'm not going to go really deep into it, but it's nice to see it. So here for example, this is the physical layer, and then I have the IP layer. I'll be able to see, for example, IP addresses of the source and the destination. This is the transport layer, and I'll be able to see protocols like TCP or UDP. Of course, HTTP is TCP based, so I'll be able to see the port. In here, I'll be able to see the TCP three-way handshake, a SYN, then a SYN ACK, and then an ACK. But what I'm interested with is this. This is the application layer protocol, and since I'm using my web browser, it's definitely an application layer, and specifically the hypertext transfer protocol. If I expand that, I'll be able to see some of that information in the header that I told you about. So again, from the general information that I see in this packet, it's get. Definitely I know this is the request. Okay, so when I see get or post or put, etc., I know it's part of a request. When I see codes, for example, here I see 304 not modified code. Basically, not modified means that the server is saying, hey, this resource you're requesting hasn't been modified since you last requested it. So this is the response. Okay, so this is all I wanted to show you in Wireshark. Wireshark is freely available to download, and like I just showed you, it's very easy to use, and it's useful also in other things that are mostly network related. Okay, so let's go back. We reached here. Okay, next is Fiddler. Okay, Fiddler is another nice program to know, and this is now more specific to this course. So Wireshark we will not be using perhaps at all in our course, but Fiddler on the other hand is a useful HTTP debugging proxy. What we mean by proxy in general is any tool that sits between two parties. So here when we say HTTP proxy, basically this tool is going to be between our browser, our web browser, and the server. So again, Fiddler is something that you can download from the web, and it's very easy to install like Wireshark. It's very straightforward. So again, let's go ahead and examine what we can do with Fiddler. I have here Fiddler 4. What is this? Isolation, yeah. Okay. Don't want that. Okay. So this is Fiddler again. Capturing, yeah, it's capturing traffic. So in a similar way, it's capturing the traffic that is going between your computer and the web server. So if I go here, click few links, I think that's enough. I go here and say stop capturing. So what we see here on the left side is a bunch of request response. They're color coded. So this is basically a main artifact that I requested, which is the home page index.php, and that is the header. I will see here some related artifacts, and I see the 304 code, which is basically it's a response that the resource hasn't been modified. I click the courses page. Again, I'll be able to see it here, and you see the 200 code, which means that it is available. If I go and say capture traffic again, and I try here, for example, anything, as you see here, I have the 404 error, which will redirect me. But if I go here and stop the capture and I look for the red, as you see here, this is 404 error. So again, let me go to one of the 200 code responses. On the right side, I have a bunch of tabs. What I'm interested in is the inspector tab, and here the header. So this is where I will see the HTTP request header, and at the bottom I'm interested in the header tab again to see the response header. Don't worry about this warning. So again, this is a GET request using HTTP, and that's what I requested. And I'll be able to see, for example, my user agent, which is the browser. I'll be able to see some cookie information, and in the response, the code is here 200, okay, and so on. So this is a quick demo. Go ahead and close this and close this and go back to my presentation. Okay, let's talk about a technology that resides on both the client side and the server side. Remember, this is a security course, and we are interested in vulnerabilities and attacks. So vulnerabilities exist in software, in services, and therefore we have to examine these technologies that are available both on the client and the server side. So on the client side, technology is, again, my computer, more specifically my web browser. On the web browser, I'll be getting a resource called the web page. So I'll see one web page at a time. The web page itself is a document written in a language called Hypertext Markup Language, or HTML. Within this web page, I might have additional client-side technologies like JavaScript, which is a scripting language. Is going to be very essential for us when we get to the security bit of the course. Also CSS, or cascading style sheet. CSS is responsible for how we present the web page. So you can think of HTML as the language responsible for what to display on the web page. Then CSS becomes that language that takes care of how to display it. So when that web page looks nice and a layout that you see is made possible usually by CSS. If we look at any page and try to view the source of that page, so we right click a web page and say view source, then we'll be able to see its source code, and that's going to be HTML regardless of what language it was written on on the server. What we see here on the client is HTML code. So as you see here, I have the syntax of the language, and I have here a CSS file associated with it and a JavaScript file associated with it. On the server side, basically, again, I have some technology that resides there. What really distinguishes client versus server side, specifically for our course, is whether we can access it or not. So client-side technology is accessible to us. That means if I have HTML, I can see it. JavaScript, I can see it. CSS, I can see it. I can actually access it and see it on my computer. However, when I have server-side technology, I will not be able to see the actual technology and code. So let's say something is written in a server-side programming language like PHP. I will not be able to see the PHP code. I'll be able to see its output. So server-side technology includes the web server like Apache or IIS, server-side programming languages like PHP, JSP, ASP, etc. I'll be able to see also the programming environment that support these programming languages, so the runtime or the interpreter, like J2EE, Java 2 Enterprise Edition for JSP, for example, which is the Java server pages. I'll have PHP environment, a certain version of it that supports the PHP programming language. PHP, by the way, is a recursive acronym which stands for, the first P is PHP, so the acronym has itself in it, hypertext preprocessor. So PHP is PHP hypertext preprocessor. And on the server side, sometimes on the same machine and sometimes on the data tier, as we explained, is the database management system like Oracle or MySQL. Okay, a demo and some practical work. What we want to do in this demo, I want to create my first web page and then my first website. I will not be using any special tools to do that. I will be using Notepad to create this page. So basically what you see here on the left is the code required to write this page. So the only thing you need to do this is Notepad and some graphic or image to include on that page. Okay, what I will do, To complete the website, I need a server, so I'm gonna go ahead and start my virtual machine. I'll explain that a little bit later, and I will go ahead and create a folder and call it first website. I downloaded already a graphic called Untitled. Let me rename it. Twitter.png. I'm gonna put it inside first website and go here. Okay, right click, text document. This is Notepad. Let me make the font large. Yep, there you go. So while I create this page, I will explain some basics of the hypertext markup language. The name HTML. Alright, so the name hypertext markup language. Hypertext is, as I explained earlier, the founding technology of the web. Language refers to programming language. Markup really is basically what's interesting here. Markup are like instructions to the browser. So here what we see is the markup, which is designated by the less than sign and the greater than sign. HTML is made of three things only. Predefined tags. This is the HTML tag, also called an element. A tag might have an attribute, and the attribute almost always will have a value that is enclosed in double quotes. So to learn HTML, all you need to learn is the tags that are available, what they do, what they're responsible for, and for each tag, basically a set of properties that are available that tell the browser additional things. Also, HTML works in a hierarchical way. That means I have a parent-child relationship. Before we get into that, this is the HTML tag. So basically the name of the tag is the first thing you see after the less than. If I have a space and I have something else, this is not the tag anymore. This is one attribute, for example. So this is the HTML tag. Any tag that you open, you must close. And the way that you close a tag is through the /. So this is a non-empty tag called HTML, starts here and ends here. It's like a box, and within it I can have other things. So this would be the root parent tag in my web page. Inside it I have two children, the head, whether you put it on a new line or the same line, it doesn't really matter, and the body. I will close the body. So they are all, head and body are siblings, and head has this important child called title. This is the title of the page. I'm gonna call it my first web page, and inside the body, the content, my first web page. I will go ahead and save this as not text, but index.html. Usually the first page of a website is the home page, and the name of the file that is the home page is, depending on the server, either index or home or default, etc. I think the most common is index.html. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. As soon as I save it as something.html, your computer knows what program it will use to open it. So if I double click it, it will ask me, actually, I stand corrected. Okay, so that's the title, my first web page, and that's the body. So the entire page is basically the body. And if I go back to, oops, here, basically all of this that you see is inside the body tag. Okay, so if I go here and want to go in a new line, let's say this is a new line, and I save it, so I hit Control S to save, or just to show you. What you will notice is that it didn't really go on a new line, because my web browser is expecting some kind of an HTML instruction to tell it to go on a new line, and I didn't give that instruction. Simply hitting enter is not an instruction. Remember, the markup that we use is HTML, so this is what we call a line break, BR. Okay, and as you see here, I have in the same tag, I have the / and we learned that the / is the way I close a tag. You say, how come this tag you're opening it and closing it within the same less than and greater than? Because this is what we call an empty tag. That means it doesn't have any content, it's just straightforward instruction. So again, Control S, and we have a new line. Okay, let's go back and see what we're trying to do. We will have a header, we have a link, we have a picture, and we have a form. Okay, so we go back here and here. So let me get rid of this. I'm gonna have a header. So I know that there is a tag, let me put a called H1, which says this is a header. So there's H1 to H6, where H1 is the largest in font size and H6 is the smallest, and I say welcome to web page. Now if I go here and write something, and I go over here and save, you see that testing is automatically on a new line because a header takes an entire line. So I don't need a BR or a line break. Okay, so next I wanted a hyperlink. The element or the tag that provides instruction to the browser to create a hyperlink, is the A element. The way it works, this is the label, so this is what people click. Okay, but I need a place to go to when they click that resource. So this is the first time you see an attribute in action, href equals to is the place I want to go to. So if I want to open my mail client, I would say mail to something. If I want to access a web page, then for example google.com, and I want to show you another attribute, so I can have 0 or more attribute. Target is equal to _ blank. This basically opens, if I go back here, I have a link, this is the label. If I click it, it opened in a new tab or a new window. So if I get rid of this, it will open in the same tab or window. Okay, what else I had? a picture. So for that, I'm gonna first, to put it on a new line, after the link, break, and then the img empty tag is the tag that allows me to put images or pictures on my web page. It requires the source src of the image, and we called it, I think, twitter.png. Now, twitter.png happens to be in the same folder where the web page is, so I don't have to provide any address, just the name. But let's say if it's in a folder called images, then I would have to do something like that. Okay. After the image, I'm gonna put a new break. First, let me see. Yep, there it is. And now I'm gonna put a form. Forms are gonna be very important for our course, because basically it's where most attackers might inject malicious code back into my website. So I have the form element. It's like a paper form, only online. And basically the paper itself is what's inside this. What do we have on a form? We have labels like name, and then we have a place to write. This is usually the input tag, and the type equal text. It's an empty element. Okay, it should have a name, which happens to be, let's say, my name or username, and it has a value, which is basically what we will write in that box. So we can put here a default is empty, or we can get rid of that. But of course, let me save this. So this is basically what we see here. A form is useless unless you can submit it. So I would need a submit button. Again, it's an input, and the type equals submit, the name equal submit, the value equals click me. Very creative. Okay, now what happens when I click it? Nothing, absolutely nothing. Why? Because I didn't tell the browser what happens when I click it. To do that, usually in the form itself, you need to provide this information. So I have two important attributes. One is the method. Remember, what methods do we have? The most common, get and post. And the one that we use with form is the post. So remember that. And another attribute called action, and this is basically what happens when I click this. So just usually I would have excuse me, usually I would have a page that handles the data being submitted, but for now I will just put this. There is nothing, I didn't create anything to handle this. So what happens when I click the button is I go here, which is basically nothing. Okay, so this is it for creating a web page. But what we want is to create a website. So what's the difference? First of all, this web page by itself can be a website, but for it to be a more formal website, there should be the layers or the tiers, right? So right now, my client is the browser. So I'm gonna go back here. Yeah, but I don't have a server in this picture. Therefore, I'm gonna create a server-based website, and that website is gonna have exactly the same thing, nothing else. So to do that, I downloaded a server bundle called Vertigo Serve. So you can download it online. This is it right here. Again, the name is, let me put it here so that you can see it. Okay, so you can find it online and download it. It's very small, and basically what it does, it has Apache web server, it has a MySQL database, and it supports PHP programming environment. And once you download it and install it, you can run it, and when it's running, you will see here a green plus sign. That means it's up and running. Now this is a virtual machine. The only reason I'm using a virtual machine is to create this more realistic environment where one computer is talking to another computer. So my host is my machine here and is accessing this guest machine through its IP address. So I'm gonna get its IP address, IP config, and yep, 192.168.235.128. I have it already. So that's my server. As you can see, I'm accessing it from my host. So we're gonna use this later on when we do more interesting things. So you can go ahead and install it, and it doesn't have to be in a virtual machine, but why not? Okay, let's go back to my virtual machine. I'm gonna click here, the server. I'm gonna go, this is basically the folder that houses this website. Okay, so what I will do in this is to create a new folder. Actually, I don't need to create a new folder. I can simply put this folder in it, which is on my, so right click, copy, paste, continue. Yep, there it is. So now what happens? If I go here, remember the name of the folder was my memory. Okay, first website. So after the / first website, and inside it there is something called index.html. I don't really have to provide this, okay, because it's the home page. So with or without, I will get the same thing. Okay, so this is our demo. The details of this demo will be available in a practical activity, including the software that we used, Wireshark, Fiddler, Vertigo, and so on. So don't worry about missing on that type of details for now. Okay, we're almost done. Oops, what did I miss? Nothing. Okay, yeah, I think we're done. So basically these are the topics that we covered. We started with some important concepts and terminology. We talked about the web applications architecture and specifically the components. We talked about the client tier, middle tier, and data tier. In the middle tier, I would have the web server and the application server. The application server is responsible for complex business logic. The web server is for presentation. We also discussed the web protocol, HTTP. Default port is 80. HTTPS, which is secure. That means the transmission between the client and the server is encrypted while it's moving, while the data is in transit, and the default port is 443. We talked about client and server technologies. We said that the client technologies is accessible. It's sent to us on our machine, so we can see the HTML pages, we can see JavaScript and CSS. The server technology, basically it resides on the server and it's not for our eyes to see or access. The output of server-side technology gets sent to us in the form of the HTML pages. Okay, this is it. Thank you for listening. Again, my name is Samer Audi, and if you like this lesson, please subscribe. And to access the lesson resources, go to my website sameraudi.com.